Blood trails down Seraphina's neck as silver fire explodes from her pale hands. The entire Great Hall drops to their knees in terror and reverence. Two identical alphas stand behind her, their claiming marks fresh on her throat, still bleeding. Before them, chained and trembling, kneels Darius Blackthorn, once a proud alpha, now stripped of everything. Seraphina's voice echoes with power that doesn't belong to any ordinary Omega. You called me cursed. You called me abomination. Now kneel before your Luna. The silver flames dance across her white skin like living things. Her lavender eyes blaze with the authority of the moon goddess herself. Every wolf in the room feels the weight of ancient power pressing down on them, forcing submission. But this moment, this triumph began 6 months earlier with rejection, exile, and a choice to survive against impossible odds. Before we continue, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. 6 months earlier, in the frozen heart of the northern Montana Rockies, Seraphina Ashford stood in her small bedroom and knew tonight would change everything. The full moon hung low over the Ashford Pack territories, casting silver light through her window. In 3 hours, she would be bonded to Darius Blackthorn in a ceremony that would unite two powerful packs through political alliance. She should have been preparing with excitement, should have been surrounded by Omega attendants fussing over her ceremonial dress and offering advice about wedding nights. Instead, she stood alone, as she'd stood alone for most of her 23 years. Seraphina studied her reflection in the mirror with clinical detachment. White hair fell past her shoulders in waves that caught moonlight like spun glass. Her skin was translucent, pale, almost luminescent in the darkness. Lavender eyes stared back at her unusual, unsettling wrong, according to every wolf who'd ever looked at her with disgust barely concealed. She was an albino Omega in a world that valued strength and conformity above all else. Her coloring marked her as different, and different meant cursed. The Ashford Pack had kept her hidden for 23 years, a shameful secret to be married off to the first alpha willing to overlook her defect for the sake of territorial alliance. Tonight, Darius Blackthorn would claim her. She'd met him exactly twice. Both times he'd looked at her the way someone might look at a necessary but unpleasant task. His dark eyes had traveled over her white hair and pale skin with barely concealed revulsion, but ambition burned stronger than disgust. The Blackthorn Pack wanted access to Ashford's silver mines. Sarah was the price they'd agreed to pay. She reached for the ceremonial dress laid across her bed, deep crimson silk chosen to contrast dramatically with her coloring. The pack wanted her to look as Omega as possible tonight, soft, decorative, forgettable, except as a vessel for future heirs. She touched the fabric and felt nothing but cold resignation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered without waiting for permission. Eleanor Ashford had once been beautiful, but years of living with an alpha who valued power over family had carved lines of perpetual worry into her face. "You look pale," Eleanor said, then caught herself. "More pale than usual, I mean." "I'm always pale, Mother. It's my defining characteristic." Eleanor winced at the bitter edge in Sarah's voice. She crossed to her daughter and placed gentle hands on her shoulders. "I know this isn't the mating you dreamed of. I know Darius isn't—" She stopped searching for diplomatic words. "Isn't what kind interested in me beyond what my pack can provide him, planning to treat me as anything more than a political necessity." Sarah's reflection stared back at her lavender eyes hard. "You can say it, Mother. This marriage is a transaction, and I'm the commodity being sold." "Seraphina," Eleanor's voice carried warning and sorrow in equal measure. "Your father made the best arrangement he could. Darius is from a strong bloodline. His pack is prosperous. You'll be provided for." "I'll be tolerated," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." Her mother's hands tightened on her shoulders. For a moment, Sarah thought she might argue, might offer some maternal comfort or reassurance that everything would work out. Instead, Eleanor's expression shifted into something harder, more resigned. "The ceremony begins in 3 hours. The Blackthorn delegation is already here. 200 pack members will witness your bonding." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Once you're marked, there's no going back. The bond is permanent. So I need you to understand something." Sarah met her mother's eyes in the mirror. "If he rejects you," Eleanor continued, a voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "the shame falls on our entire pack. Your father has staked his reputation on this alliance. If Darius refuses to complete the bond, you'll be exiled. Do you understand? Not just shunned, completely exiled from Packlands." Ice spread through Sarah's chest. "You're telling me that if he decides I'm too defective to bond with, I'll be cast out. That's the consequence for his choice." "That's the consequence for being what you are," Eleanor said bluntly. "I'm sorry, daughter, but you need to know the stakes. Tonight you smile, you submit. You make yourself as appealing as possible to that alpha, and you pray to the moon goddess that he finds you acceptable enough to complete the ceremony. She pressed something into Sarah's hand, a small backpack carefully packed. Sarah looked down at it in confusion. Just in case, Eleanor whispered. Medical supplies, dried food, fire starter, a good knife. If the worst happens, you'll have a chance to reach neutral territories. Her voice cracked. I can't protect you from your father's political ambitions or pack law, but I can give you this. Sarah stared at the backpack, understanding flooding through her. Her own mother was preparing for her potential exile. Expected it even. Had packed survival supplies like someone might pack a funeral arrangement. You think he's going to reject me, Sarah said flatly. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. Something shifted inside Sarah in that moment. The cold resignation that had filled her for weeks transformed into something harder, sharper. If her own mother expected her to be cast aside like defective goods, if her father saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, if Darius Blackthorne was going to judge her worth based solely on her appearance, then she would give them all exactly what they expected. But she wouldn't beg, she wouldn't grovel, and she certainly wouldn't break. Thank you for the supplies, Sarah said, her voice steady. I'll keep them close. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. I love you. I wish things were different. So do I. Her mother left without another word, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like finality. Sarah stood alone in her room holding the emergency backpack that represented her mother's last act of care. Around her, the Ashford estate buzzed with preparation for the ceremony. She could hear wolves moving through the halls, voices raised in excitement about the political alliance, the strengthening of pack bonds, the prestige of joining with the powerful Blackthorne line. No one mentioned the cursed albino Omega being sacrificed to make it happen. Sarah set the backpack carefully in the corner hidden behind her dresser. Then she began the process of making herself presentable for her own potential rejection. The ceremonial dress fit perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. Deep crimson silk clung to her curves, cut low enough to be enticing but modest enough to be appropriate. The color made her white skin look even paler, her white hair even more striking. She looked like a ghost dipped in blood, beautiful in a disturbing, otherworldly way that would either fascinate or repel. She braided her hair, simply wove in small, silver charms that caught the light. Applied minimal cosmetics because anything more looked garish against her coloring. Fastened the traditional Omega collar around her throat, a delicate silver chain that marked her as unbonded, available for claiming. When she looked at her reflection one final time, she saw exactly what she was, a political offering, dressed up as a bride. The walk to the Great Hall felt endless and far too short simultaneously. Pack members lined the corridors, their eyes tracking her movement, with expressions ranging from pity to relief that it was her and not their daughters being sent to appease the Blackthorne pack. No one offered congratulations or well wishes. This wasn't that kind of bonding. The Great Hall had been transformed for the ceremony. Hundreds of candles cast flickering light across stone walls. Pack banners hung from the high ceiling, Ashford silver and blue on one side, Blackthorne black and gold on the other. 200 wolves filled the space, a mix of both packs gathered to witness the alliance being sealed. And at the front of the hall, standing before the raised dais where the pack elders waited, stood Darius Blackthorne. He was objectively handsome in the way many alphas were: tall, powerfully built, with dark hair and darker eyes that surveyed everything with calculating assessment. He wore traditional ceremonial clothing, black leather, and gold embroidery that emphasized his status. Next to him stood his father, Alpha Blackthorne, a brutal-looking man with silver threading through his dark hair and scars marking his face from decades of pack warfare. Sarah's father, Alpha Ashford, stood on the opposite side. He was smaller than the Blackthorne Alpha, his power more political than physical. When his eyes landed on Sarah entering the hall, his expression held only one thing: desperate hope that she wouldn't ruin this for him. The traditional music began. Every head turned to watch Sarah's entrance. She lifted her chin and walked down the center aisle with her spine straight and her eyes forward. She would not shuffle. She would not cower. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would face it with dignity intact. The wolves watched her pass with a mixture of emotions playing across their faces. Some looked curious. They'd heard about the cursed Ashford Omega, but never seen her up close. Others looked disturbed by her appearance, uncomfortable with how her coloring violated every norm of what an Omega should look like. A few mostly older wolves looked at her with something that might have been recognition, as if her appearance triggered memories of old stories they'd heard in childhood. Sarah ignored them all, Her focus narrowed to Darius Blackthorne, whose expression remained carefully neutral as she approached. When she reached the dais, she stopped before him. Pack law required her to lower her eyes in submission. She kept them level instead, meeting his dark gaze directly. His jaw tightened, a flash of irritation at her subtle defiance. Elder Marcus, the pack's spiritual leader, began the traditional ceremony words. His voice echoed through the silent hall, speaking of bonds and duty and the moon goddess's blessing on unions that strengthened pack ties. Sarah heard the words but didn't process them. Every atom of her attention focused on Darius, watching for any sign of what he would choose. The ceremony progressed through its ancient rituals. The lighting of unity candles, the exchange of pack tokens. She offered the Ashford silver mine, claimed he offered Blackthorn protection and resources. Their fathers stood witness, both looking satisfied with the political arrangement. Then came the moment that would determine everything. Elder Marcus gestured for Darius to approach Sarah. The Alpha will now scent his intended mate. If the bond is acceptable, he will mark her before the assembled packs. If the bond is rejected, he will declare it so, and the Omega will be released from her obligation. Released. Such a gentle word for exile and shame. Darius stepped closer. The entire hall held its breath. Sarah stood perfectly still as he circled behind her, moving into position to scent her neck where the claiming mark would go. This was the moment when Alpha's confirmed mate compatibility, when instinct either recognized its match or rejected it outright. She felt his breath hot against her skin, felt him lean in close enough that his lips nearly touched her throat. And then he inhaled deeply. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Darius jerked backward as if she'd burned him. His face twisted with revulsion, so complete that gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Sarah's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. Darius stepped around to face her again, and there was no mistaking the disgust in his eyes now. He looked at her the way someone might look at something diseased, contaminated, fundamentally wrong. "No," he said, voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Absolutely not." Alpha Ashford stepped forward quickly, panic flashing across his face. "What's wrong? The contract is signed, the terms agreed upon." "Look at her," Darius interrupted, gesturing at Sarah with barely concealed contempt. "She's an abomination. That coloring isn't natural. It's a curse from the moon goddess herself, marking defective bloodlines that should be allowed to die out." The words landed like physical blows. Around the hall, wolves shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded agreement. Others looked away, unwilling to witness this public humiliation, but not willing to defend her either. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her chin up and her eyes steady. The bonding was arranged. Alpha Ashford tried again, desperation making his voice sharp. "You agreed to the terms." "I agreed before I saw exactly how defective she is." Darius cut him off coldly, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah again with pure disdain. "I won't pollute my bloodline with whatever curse runs through her veins. Look at her skin, her hair, her eyes, everything about her screams wrong. Do you really expect me to bind myself permanently to that?" The watching crowd murmured. Some of the Blackthorn wolves nodded approval at their future Alpha's decisiveness. Most of the Ashford wolves looked relieved they weren't responsible for this disaster, while simultaneously horrified at the public rejection of their pack member. Elder Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Alpha Blackthorn, the ceremony has already begun. Breaking a bonding agreement at this stage brings shame to both packs." "The shame is already here," Darius interrupted, gesturing at Sarah again. "You're asking me to mate with a cursed Omega who looks like she crawled out of a winter grave. The Blackthorn pack has standards." Something cold and sharp crystallized inside Sarah. She'd expected rejection. Her mother had warned her. But standing here being called defective and cursed in front of 200 witnesses, being treated like contaminated goods not worth touching, it ignited something she hadn't known existed inside her. Rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage. She took one step forward, closing the distance Darius had put between them. Her voice when she spoke rang clear and steady through the hall. "You're absolutely right." Everyone froze. That wasn't the response anyone expected. Sarah continued, lavender eyes blazing. "You're completely correct that I'm not natural, that I'm different from every other Omega you've ever seen. What you're wrong about is calling it a curse." Darius's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, Omega. You're in no position." "I reject this bonding," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I reject this pack that values appearance over character. I reject an Alpha too shallow and weak to see beyond surface differences. And I reject the goddess-damned idea that I should feel grateful for scraps of attention from wolves who would only tolerate me for political gain. Shocked silence filled the hall. Omegas didn't speak this way. They certainly didn't reject alphas publicly, didn't call future pack leaders shallow and weak before assembled witnesses. Alpha Ashford made a strangled sound of horror. Serafina, you will apologize immediately. No. Sarah turned to face her father, and something in her expression made him take an involuntary step backward. I won't apologize for having dignity. You wanted to sell me to secure your precious alliance. He wanted to use me for territorial access despite finding me repulsive. Neither of you saw me as anything more than a tool to be traded. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of wolves who'd watched her grow up in isolation, who'd whispered curse and abomination whenever they thought she couldn't hear, who'd treated her like a shameful secret to be hidden away. I'm done, Sarah said simply. Done being your dirty secret. Done accepting treatment no wolf should endure. If being cursed means refusing to grovel before wolves who don't deserve me, then I'll wear that curse with pride. The hall erupted. Wolves shouted over each other, some calling for her immediate punishment, others looking shocked, a few watching with something that might have been reluctant admiration. Darius's face flushed with rage at being rejected and called weak in front of so many witnesses. He took a threatening step towards Sarah. You insolent, don't. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with surprising authority. You've already made your choice. I've made mine. We're done here. Alpha Blackthorn moved forward, his expression thunderous. Your daughter has brought shame on both our packs with this display. She must be punished. Agreed, Alpha Ashford said quickly, eager to salvage what he could from this disaster. Serafina, you are hereby exiled, Sarah finished for him. Yes, I know. Mother already explained the consequences. She pulled the Omega collar from her throat and let it fall to the stone floor with a metallic ring that seemed impossibly loud. You don't have to cast me out. I'm leaving. She turned and walked toward the hall's main entrance. Every wolf parted before her, creating a clear path. No one tried to stop her. No one spoke. At the doorway, Sarah paused and looked back one final time. Her father looked furious and humiliated. Darius looked outraged that an Omega had dared speak to him that way. The crowd looked various combinations of shocked, scandalized, and uncertain. One more thing, Sarah said into the tense silence. Her voice carried clearly strengthened by something she didn't fully understand. When I return to these territories, and I will return, every wolf here will remember this moment. You'll remember the cursed Omega you discarded, and you'll wish you'd seen what I actually am before you threw me away. Silver light flickered briefly across her skin so fast most wolves convinced themselves they'd imagined it. Then Serafina Ashford walked out of the great hall, out of her pack, out of the only life she'd ever known, and into the frozen Montana night beyond. Behind her, chaos erupted as both packs tried to process what had just happened. But Sarah didn't look back. She moved through the Ashford Estates corridors with purpose, heading for her room one final time. Wolves she passed pressed themselves against walls unwilling to touch, her uncertain what to do with an Omega who'd just publicly rejected an Alpha in her own pack. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. She had more important things to worry about. In her room, Sarah stripped off the ceremonial dress and changed into practical clothing, sturdy pants, warm tunic, thick jacket, boots made for winter travel. She retrieved the backpack her mother had prepared, grateful now for Eleanor's foresight. Inside, she found more than just survival supplies. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a small leather journal filled with her mother's handwriting. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it. The first page read, "For my daughter in case the worst happens." These are the stories the elders don't tell anymore. About Omegas who were more than they seemed. About white wolves marked by the moon goddess herself. About power that runs through bloodlines thought extinct. If you're reading this, you'll need to know what you might truly be. She didn't have time to read more. Raised voices echoed from nearby corridors, her father's enforcers coming to ensure she left immediately. Sarah tucked the journal into her pack, took one last look at the room where she'd spent 23 years in isolation, and climbed out the window into the night. The temperature had dropped sharply. Snow would come soon, possibly within hours. Sarah's breath misted in the freezing air as she moved quickly across the estate grounds, staying to shadows, avoiding the main gates where guards would be stationed. She knew these lands, had explored them during the rare times she'd been allowed outside. There was a section of the eastern wall where stones had crumbled, creating a gap just large enough for someone determined to squeeze through. She'd discovered it years ago, had kept it secret, some instinct telling her she might need an escape route someday. That instinct proved correct. Sarah slipped through the gap in the wall and immediately entered true wilderness. The Ashford Pack territories were bordered on the east by unaffiliated forest that stretched for hundreds of miles neutral ground where no pack could legally pursue her. If she could reach it before anyone organized a proper search, she'd have a chance. She ran. The forest swallowed her within minutes. Trees closed overhead, blocking out the moonlight, turning the world into shadows and uncertain footing. Sarah's night vision was better than most wolves' one advantage of her unusual coloring. She navigated by memory and instinct, pushing deeper into territories she'd only glimpsed from the estate's borders. Behind her, she heard howls rising from the Ashford lands. They'd discovered her absence. Whether they'd pursue remained uncertain. Pack law said she'd been released from her obligations. But Alpha Ashford's pride had been damaged tonight. He might send wolves after her anyway, if only to ensure she didn't spread stories about what had happened. Sarah ran faster. The temperature continued dropping. Her breath came in ragged gasps that froze in the air. Her legs burned with effort. But she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Not until she'd put enough distance between herself and the pack that no patrol would risk following. Hours passed in a blur of movement and darkness and cold seeping deeper into her bones. The initial adrenaline that had carried her began to fade, replaced by exhaustion and the reality of what she'd just done. She'd burned every bridge, destroyed every connection, walked away from the only safety she'd ever known. She was completely alone in the wilderness that killed unprepared wolves every winter. And somehow, impossibly, she felt more free than she had in her entire life. Sarah finally stopped when her legs refused to carry her further. She'd reached a small clearing where fallen trees created natural shelter. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion. Her hands were numb despite her gloves. But she'd done it. She'd escaped. Now came the hard part: surviving. Sarah's training and survival was limited. The pack had kept her isolated, hadn't bothered teaching her skills. They assumed she'd never need as a mated Omega living in pack housing. But her mother's journal had included practical information, and Sarah had read everything she could find about wilderness survival over the years, knowing instinctively that knowledge was power even for a cursed Omega. She used that knowledge now. First priority: shelter. She couldn't travel at night in unfamiliar territory. Better to rest, conserve energy. Wait for daylight. Sarah dragged fallen branches into a formation that would block wind and trap body heat. Not comfortable, but functional. Second priority: fire. Her mother had included a fire starter in the pack. Sarah gathered dry wood from beneath the fallen trees where snow hadn't reached, arranged it carefully, and worked the fire starter with numb fingers until sparks caught. The small flame felt like a miracle. Third priority: assess supplies. The backpack contained enough food for maybe 3 days if she was careful. A basic medical kit, a good knife, a water flask, warm blanket. Not much, but enough to give her a fighting chance if she moved fast toward neutral territories where larger packs maintained trading posts. Sarah sat before her small fire and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd been rejected, exiled, cast out by her own pack with nothing but survival supplies and her mother's cryptic journal. Everything she'd feared had come true, except it didn't feel like failure. It felt like escape. For the first time in 23 years, no one was controlling her movements or dictating her worth. No one was hiding her away like a shameful secret. No Alpha was evaluating whether she was acceptable enough to tolerate. She was free, desperately, dangerously free. Sarah pulled out her mother's journal and began to read by firelight. The entries detailed stories the elders had stopped telling generations ago. Stories about Omegas with unusual coloring who manifested powers thought lost to history. About moon-blessed wolves marked by the goddess herself to serve as healers, seers, protectors. About bloodlines that carried ancient gifts triggered only by extreme circumstances. About white wolves, specifically albinos like Sarah, who appeared once every few generations as vessels for the goddess's power. Her mother had written the pack called you cursed because they didn't know the old stories. Or they did know and feared what you might become, true moon. Blessed are marked by pale coloring white hair, light eyes, skin that seems to glow under moonlight. They emerge during times of great change when the goddess needs direct intervention in pack politics. They can heal, sense truth, sometimes wield silver fire in defense of the innocent. Silver fire. Sarah remembered the brief flicker of light across her skin in the Great Hall. Had that been real, or just a trick of candlelight and emotion? The journal continued. If you are truly moon-blessed, your power will manifest when you're ready, when you've survived hardship, when you've proven yourself worthy. The goddess doesn't grant her gifts to those who've never been tested. Sarah closed the journal carefully. Around her, the forest night was alive with sounds, wind through branches, Small animals moving through underbrush, distant howls of wolves on territory she'd left behind. The fire crackled and popped, keeping the worst of the cold at bay. She was alone in wilderness with winter coming. She had minimal supplies and no guarantee she'd reach safety, but she also had something she'd never possessed before: agency. Choice. The freedom to become whoever she was meant to be without anyone else defining her worth. Tomorrow she would start the journey toward neutral territories. Tonight she would rest and plan and let herself feel proud of choosing dignity over acceptance. Serafina Ashford had been rejected as a cursed Omega. But maybe Serafina Ashford had never been meant to be an Omega who accepted rejection. Maybe she'd been meant for something else entirely. Dawn broke cold and merciless over the Montana wilderness. Serafina woke to frost coating her makeshift shelter and her fire reduced to smoking embers. Every muscle in her body screamed protest as she forced herself upright. The temperature had dropped further during the night and her breath formed thick clouds in the air. She allowed herself 5 minutes to assess the situation with clear eyes. 3 days of food if she was careful. No map beyond general knowledge that neutral territories lay somewhere to the north and east. Winter storm weather that could turn deadly without warning. And behind her pack lands where she was no longer welcome. Forward was the only option. Sarah packed her supplies methodically, checking everything twice. The fire she buried carefully, scattering the evidence. Survival meant leaving no trail for anyone who might be tracking her. She ate sparingly from her provisions, dried meat and hard bread that required careful chewing, and filled her water flask from a small stream she found nearby, the water so cold it hurt her teeth. Then she began walking north. The first day passed in grueling monotony. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by occasional clearings or rocky outcroppings. Sarah navigated by the sun's position, keeping it to her right as it tracked across the sky. Her legs ached from yesterday's run. Blisters formed inside her boots despite the thick socks. But she kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant freezing. She saw no other wolves. This deep into neutral territory, pack patrols rarely ventured. The land belonged to no one and everyone, a buffer zone between organized territories where rogues occasionally traveled, but few stayed permanently. It was dangerous precisely because it was lawless, but that lawlessness also meant freedom from pack politics and alpha commands. By the time darkness fell again, Sarah had covered maybe 15 miles. Not enough. Neutral trading posts were still days away at this pace. She made another shelter, another small fire ate another meager portion of her supplies. The temperature continued dropping. Snow would come soon. She could smell it in the air, that peculiar metallic scent that preceded winter storms in the mountains. The second day brought confirmation. She woke to snowflakes drifting through gaps in her shelter. Within an hour, it had become proper snowfall. By midday, the storm had intensified into something dangerous. Sarah pushed forward anyway. She had to. Her supplies wouldn't last through days of sitting still, and she needed to reach the trading posts before the real winter weather locked down the entire region. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her face, pulled her hood low, and fought through increasingly deep snow. The wind picked up as afternoon approached, transforming the steady snowfall into a blizzard that erased visibility beyond a few feet. Sarah's world became nothing but white chaos and cold that cut through every layer of clothing. She could no longer see the sun to navigate by. Trees appeared suddenly out of the white, forcing her to change direction constantly. She was lost. Completely, utterly lost in a blizzard that showed no signs of stopping. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat. Sarah shoved it down ruthlessly. Panic killed faster than cold. She needed to think clearly. Make smart decisions, survive through competence rather than luck. First decision, find shelter immediately. Walking blindly in a blizzard would only exhaust her faster. She needed to wait out the worst of the storm somewhere protected. Sarah changed tactics, moving carefully from tree to tree, feeling along massive trunks for any indication of hollow spaces or wind-protected areas. Her hands had gone numb inside her gloves. Her face burned with cold. Every breath hurt. Then her foot caught on something buried under the snow, and she fell hard, sliding down a slope she hadn't seen. She tumbled maybe 15 feet before crashing into a snowdrift that cushioned the impact. For a moment, she lay still, assessing for injuries. Bruises definitely, but nothing broken. When she managed to sit up, she realized she'd fallen into a ravine of sorts, a natural depression in the landscape where massive boulders created walls on 3 sides. The wind still howled overhead, but down here the force of it was broken. Snow fell steadily, but not with the blinding intensity of the exposed forest. It was as good as she was going to get. Sarah forced her exhausted body into motion. She gathered fallen branches from where they'd collected against the boulder walls, protected from the worst of the weather. Her fire starter was still dry inside its waterproof pouch, though her hands shook so badly it took 6 attempts to create sparks. When flame finally caught, she nearly cried with relief. The fire was small and smoky, but it meant the difference between surviving the night and freezing. Sarah huddled as close to it as she dared, feeding branches carefully to maintain the burn. Around her, the ravine filled with snow. Above, the blizzard continued its assault on the forest. She ate the last of her dried meat and half of her remaining bread. Tomorrow she'd need to hunt or forage, assuming the storm passed and assuming she had any energy left for hunting. The knife her mother had packed could theoretically kill small game. Whether Sarah had the skill to actually catch anything remained uncertain. Night fell early, hastened by the storm clouds blocking any remaining light. The temperature plummeted. Sarah wrapped herself in the blanket from her pack and pressed as close to the fire as physically possible, but cold still seeped through every layer, settling into her bones with malicious intent. This was how wolves died in winter. Not dramatically, not fighting, just slowly freezing in the darknesses while storms raged overhead. Sarah refused to let it end that way. She forced herself to stay awake, to keep the fire burning, to keep moving enough that her blood didn't stop circulating. She sang songs under her breath. Old pack songs, ironically the only ones she knew because sound proved she was still conscious. She thought about everything she'd survived to reach this point. The years of isolation, the public rejection, the choice to walk away rather than accept scraps of dignity. She'd come too far to die in a ravine. The night stretched endlessly. Hours blurred together in cycles of feeding the fire, fighting exhaustion, and forcing her body to keep generating heat. At some point, she must have dozed despite her best efforts, because she jolted awake to find the fire dangerously low and her body shaking uncontrollably. Hypothermia. She was sliding into hypothermia. Sarah fed the fire with trembling hands, building it back up until warmth returned in painful waves. Her fingers and toes had gone beyond numb into something worse, a burning sensation that meant frostbite threatened. She massaged them carefully, working circulation back, ignoring the pain. Dawn came eventually, gray and reluctant. The blizzard had passed during the night, leaving behind a world buried in fresh snow. Everything looked different, transformed by the storm into alien landscape. Sarah climbed carefully out of the ravine, using boulder handholds, and surveyed her situation. Snow stretched in every direction, pristine and unmarked. No tracks, no trails, no indication which direction held salvation versus more wilderness. The sun remained hidden behind thick clouds that promised more snow soon. She was lost, nearly out of supplies, and showing early signs of frostbite. 3 days in the wilderness and she was already failing. No, she wasn't failing. She was surviving against impossible odds with minimal resources. That counted as success, not failure. Sarah chose a direction north by her best guess and started walking. Every step required conscious effort. Her body wanted to stop, to rest, to give up the constant struggle against cold and exhaustion. She forced it to keep moving through sheer stubbornness. Mid-morning brought a small victory. She found animal tracks, rabbit by the size and pattern, and managed to follow them to a warren entrance. Setting a snare with numb fingers took 3 attempts, but she got it positioned. Whether anything would actually be caught remained uncertain, but at least she tried. At least she was actively working to survive rather than passively accepting death. She marked the location carefully in her mind and continued north, promising herself she'd circle back before nightfall to check the snare. The day passed in exhausted determination. One foot in front of the other. Breathe, keep moving, don't stop. Her world narrowed to just those imperatives, repeated endlessly. Afternoon brought new snow, lighter than yesterday's blizzard, but enough to erase any tracks she might have left. Sarah's hope of finding the snare again diminished. She was too disoriented, too exhausted to navigate reliably. When darkness began falling, she had to accept reality. She needed shelter, again, needed to rest before complete exhaustion made her sloppy and dangerous. The landscape offered a cluster of dense evergreens whose branches had captured snow, creating a natural hollow underneath. Not ideal, but functional. She crawled inside, used the last of her energy to start another small fire, and ate the final piece of bread from her pack. Tomorrow she'd have no food at all. Tomorrow she'd need to either catch something or start considering which plants might be edible versus poisonous. Tomorrow assumed she survived tonight. Sarah wrapped herself in her blanket and tried to generate warmth through sheer willpower. The fire helped, but not enough. Cold crept in, relentlessly stealing heat faster than she could produce it. Her body began shaking again, involuntary tremors that exhausted her further. She thought about her mother's journal, still tucked safely in the waterproof section of her pack, about the stories of moon-blessed omegas who manifested power during extreme hardship, about white wolves marked by the goddess to serve as vessels of ancient strength. If those stories were true, now would be an excellent time for divine intervention. But nothing happened. No silver fire warmed her. No supernatural power descended to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. She was just a cold, exhausted Omega slowly freezing in wilderness that cared nothing for her dramatic rejection of pack life or her determination to survive. The universe, Sarah decided, had a cruel sense of humor. She must have slept despite the cold because she woke to complete darkness and the fire reduced to barely glowing coals. Disoriented, she tried to sit up and couldn't. Her body refused to respond properly. Muscles wouldn't obey commands. Her thoughts moved sluggishly, struggling through thick fog. This was bad. This was very bad. Sarah forced herself to focus. Fed the fire with branches that seemed impossibly heavy. The flames rebuilt, slowly casting orange light across her shelter. She held her hands toward the warmth, but couldn't feel it properly. Everything felt distant and muted, like experiencing the world through thick glass. Severe hypothermia. She knew the symptoms. Confusion, lethargy, loss of motor control. If she let herself slide deeper, she'd simply go to sleep and never wake up. Part of her whispered that sleep sounded wonderful, that fighting was exhausting, that she'd made her stand and proven her point wasn't that enough. The larger part of her snarled in fury at the very idea of giving up now. She'd survived 23 years of isolation and scorn. She'd walked away from everything she'd ever known with just a backpack and dignity. She'd endured public rejection and exile. She'd made it 3 days in winter wilderness with minimal supplies. She absolutely refused to die in a tree hollow after coming this far. Sarah forced herself to move, to exercise despite exhaustion, to generate heat through activity. She did push-ups with trembling arms, squats on shaking legs, anything to make her blood move faster to produce warmth from within since the fire wasn't enough. It hurt. Everything hurt. But pain meant alive and alive meant still fighting. Dawn came eventually, 4th day in the wilderness. 0 food remaining, water flask nearly empty. Frostbite definitely affecting her fingers and toes, but alive. Still alive. Sarah crawled out of her shelter into another overcast morning. More snow had fallen during the night. The forest looked like a frozen wonderland that would kill her if she made one wrong choice. She needed to hunt successfully today. Needed to find water. Needed to cover ground toward trading posts or settlements, or literally any sign of other wolves. Needed a miracle, basically. She started walking anyway because giving up wasn't in her vocabulary. The morning passed in a haze of exhaustion and determination. Sarah's world narrowed to just the next tree, the next clearing, the next 100 yards. She looked for anything edible, berries buried under snowbark that might be safely consumed, any indication of animal dens. Found nothing. Midday arrived with ominous clouds building overhead. Another storm coming, maybe within hours. Sarah's legs finally gave out around what she estimated was early afternoon. She collapsed against a tree trunk, breath coming in ragged gasps, body trembling with the effort of just staying conscious. This was it. This was as far as she could go. She'd tried. She'd fought. She'd refused to quit even when quitting made sense. But her body simply had nothing left to give. At least she'd die free. That counted for something. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. Exhaustion pulled at her like physical weight. Just for a moment, she thought. Just rest for a moment, and then keep going. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard howling. Pack howls, coordinated and purposeful. Her foggy brain couldn't decide if that was real or hallucination brought on by hypothermia. The howls got closer. Definitely real then. Sarah tried to stand to run, but her body refused to cooperate. She managed to push herself more upright against the tree to reach for the knife in her pack with numb fingers. If pack wolves had tracked her down to drag her back or punish her for the scene in the Great Hall, she'd at least die fighting. 2 massive wolves materialized from the trees, moving with the fluid coordination of experienced warriors. Both were identical in size and coloring, deep charcoal gray with darker markings. Both stopped about 20 feet away, assessing her with intelligent amber eyes. Twins Sarah's exhausted brain supplied, alpha twins by their size and presence. They shifted seamlessly from wolf to human form, moving with casual power that suggested they'd been fighting in both forms since childhood. Standing before her were 2 of the most striking males Sarah had ever seen, identical in every way, except one had a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Both were tall and powerfully built, with dark hair, slightly long and windswept. Sharp features that balanced between brutal and beautiful. Bare-chested, despite the cold, wearing only leather pants and boots, unbothered by weather that was killing her. Alphas? Definitely alphas. The dominance rolled off them in waves strong enough to make her omega instincts scream a submission despite her exhaustion. The one with the scar spoke first. She's hypothermic, frostbite on extremities, maybe 4 hours from critical organ shutdown. His voice was deep and measured, clinically assessing her condition like a battlefield injury. His eyes cataloged every detail. Her pale skin made paler by cold, her white hair matted with snow, her trembling body struggling to stay upright. The other twin crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level about 10 feet away. "Can you hear us? Are you coherent?" His voice was warmer than his brother's, carrying genuine concern rather than clinical assessment. But both voices held authority that expected obedience, expected answers. Sarah's grip tightened on her knife. "Stay back." Her voice came out as barely a whisper hoarse from days of minimal water and cold air. Neither twin looked remotely threatened by her small blade or her weak command. Scar Twin looked at his brother. Definitely coherent, stubborn too, trying to threaten us. The other twin's mouth quirked slightly. She built a fire in a ravine during a blizzard. Survived 3 days in winter wilderness with minimal supplies. Stubborn is an understatement. They could see her fire sites, could track her trail through the forest. Sarah's exhausted mind struggled to process how they'd found her, why they were here. "We're not going to hurt you," the warmer-voiced twin said gently. "We're Ravenclaw pack patrolling our eastern border. You collapsed in our territory. We need to get you somewhere warm before the next storm hits." Ravenclaw pack. The name meant nothing to Sarah. She didn't know these territories, didn't know which packs controlled what lands this far north. "I don't need help," she managed, though they could all hear the lie. She was dying and they knew it, and she knew it. Scar Twin stood smoothly. "Your pride is admirable but irrelevant. You have two choices: come with us to our fortress, where our healer can treat your frostbite, or stay here and freeze to death in the next few hours. Choose quickly, we don't have time for extended negotiation." "Kale Maunam," the other twin said quietly, a note of warning in his voice. To Sarah he added, "I'm Thorn Ravenclaw. This is my brother Kale. We're joint commanders of Ravenclaw Pack. Our lands extend from here north for about 60 miles. Helping lost wolves is not a trap or trick, it's just what civilized packs do." Sarah's knife hand wavered. Every survival instinct screamed warnings about trusting strange alphas. But rational thought pointed out that if they wanted to hurt her, they could have done so easily already. She was too weak to fight, too exhausted to run. Completely at their mercy whether she admitted it or not, and she was so cold. "Why?" she asked. "Why help a rogue?" Kale and Thorn exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Thorn answered, "Because you're not rogue by choice, are you? Your scent carries pack origin Ashford pack, if I'm reading it right. But it's fading, which means you were recently cast out or exiled." His amber eyes studied her face with uncomfortable perception. "And given your unusual appearance and the way you're clutching that knife like you expect attack, despite clear disadvantage, I'm guessing the exile wasn't voluntary on your part." Sarah said nothing, but something in her expression must have confirmed his guess. Kale's assessment was more direct. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then figured it didn't matter. They could find out easily enough if they wanted. "Seraphina Ashford." Recognition flashed across both twins' faces. Kale's eyebrows rose fractionally. "The cursed Ashford Omega. We heard about the Blackthorn bonding disaster." His lips twitched. "You called an alpha shallow and weak in the Great Hall before walking out, according to the rumors." "He rejected me first," Sarah corrected, some of her spirit returning. "I just made it mutual." Both twins smiled, identical expressions of amusement that transformed their faces from intimidating to almost approachable. "Even better," Thorn said. "Seraphina Ashford, you're currently dying of exposure in Ravenclaw territory. Will you accept our help, or do we need to override your pride and carry you to our fortress against your will?" The casual mention of carrying her against her will should have been threatening. Somehow, coming from Thorn with that gentle voice and genuine concern in his eyes, it just sounded practical. Sarah's knife finally lowered. "If I accept help, what do you want in return?" "Nothing," Kale said flatly. "We're not Blackthorn Pack. We don't demand payment for basic decency." "Everyone wants something," Sarah insisted. Thorn stood slowly, movements deliberate and non-threatening. "What we want is for you to not die in our territory, because that creates territorial complications we'd rather avoid. What we want is to get you to safety before the storm hits. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we'll figure it out after you're not hypothermic." Sarah tried to stand on her own and failed. Her legs simply wouldn't support her weight anymore. Before she could fall, Kale moved with alpha speed and caught her, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing. She tensed immediately, instinct screaming about being held by a strange alpha. But his grip was careful, supporting rather than constraining. His body heat seeped through her frozen layers like a gift from the goddess herself. "Easy," he said quietly. "I've got you. Just conserve your energy." Thorn had already retrieved her backpack, was checking the contents with efficient movements. He pulled out her mother's journal, studied it briefly, then tucked it safely back inside before shouldering the pack. "Can you shift?" Kale asked Sarah. She shook her head weakly. "Never have. Can't." Both twins went very still. Thorn's eyes sharpened with sudden, intense interest. "You can't shift at all, ever." "Defective," Sarah said bitterly, just like Darius said. "Or moon-blessed," Thorn countered quietly. "Old bloodline Omegas sometimes manifest as shift-locked until their power awakens." He looked at his brother. "Kale, I think." "Later," Kale interrupted. "Storm's coming. We need to move." He shifted smoothly back to wolf form, while still holding Sarah, which should have been impossible but apparently wasn't for alphas of this caliber. Suddenly, she was cradled in the jaws of a massive charcoal wolf who carried her as carefully as she was made of glass. Thorn shifted beside them, and then both twins were running through the forest with speed and coordination that spoke of decades fighting together. The trees blurred past. Cold wind rushed over Sarah's face. She should have been terrified, held in the jaws of a predator, being carried deeper into unknown territory, completely helpless. Instead, for the first time in days, she felt something like safe. Sarah let her eyes drift closed as exhaustion finally claimed her. She'd survived. Against impossible odds, with nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit, she'd survived long enough to be found. Whether that finding proved blessing or curse remained to be seen. But for now, wrapped in the warmth of an alpha's careful grip, Sarah let herself stop fighting and just rest. The last thing she heard before consciousness faded completely was Thorn's voice speaking to his brother in their twin shorthand. "Moon-blessed Kale, has to be. Look at the scent markers." And Kale's response, carrying something that might have been awe, "I know. After 28 years, we finally found her." Then darkness took her, and Seraphina Ashford knew nothing more. Seraphina woke to warmth. Real warmth, not the desperate heat of a dying fire or the brief relief of physical exertion, but genuine comfortable warmth that seeped into her bones and made her aware of how close she'd come to losing everything to the cold. She lay perfectly still, taking inventory. Soft sheets beneath her, multiple blankets covering her, the faint scent of herbs and healing salves. Her body ached everywhere, but it was the good ache of healing rather than the sharp pain of active injury. She opened her eyes to find herself in a room carved from mountain stone, with one wall featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked snow-covered peaks painted gold by sunset. The chamber was warm despite the visible storm outside, heated by some system she couldn't immediately identify. Crystals embedded in the walls provided soft, steady illumination. "You're awake. Good." Sarah turned her head to find an older Omega woman sitting in a chair beside the bed, her expression a mix of professional assessment and genuine warmth. She had silver threading through dark hair and the kind of calm competence that spoke of decades of healing experience. "I'm Liana," the woman said. "Ravenclaw Pack's head healer. You've been unconscious for 36 hours while your body recovered from severe hypothermia and stage 2 frostbite." She gestured to Sarah's hands, which were wrapped in clean bandages. "We saved your fingers and toes, but it was close. Another few hours and you'd have lost them." Sarah processed this information slowly. 36 hours. She'd been out for a day and a half. "Where am I, Brightomone, Ravenclaw Fortress?" "Our alphas brought you in 4 days ago, though you were only conscious for about 3 minutes of that rescue, according to Kael." Liana's smile was gentle. "You've caused quite a stir. It's not every day twin alphas discover their fated mate dying in the wilderness." Sarah's breath caught. Fated mate. The bond activated when they touched you. Both of them felt it simultaneously. Liana's expression turned more serious. "Which means you felt it too, even in your hypothermic state. The mate bond doesn't form without mutual recognition." Memories surfaced through Sarah's foggy mind. The electric shock when Kael had lifted her. The inexplicable sense of safety despite being held by strange alphas. The way her Omega instincts had immediately recognized them as hers, even while her conscious mind was still processing threat assessment. "I don't understand," Sarah said quietly. "Darius rejected me. The entire pack called me cursed. How can I suddenly have not one but 2 fated mates?" Liana's smile turned knowing. "Because Darius Blackthorn is a fool who can't recognize divine marking when it's standing right in front of him. You're not cursed, child. You're moon-blessed. Surely you've begun to suspect. Sarah thought of her mother's journal. The stories about white wolves and goddess-marked omegas. The silver fire that had flickered across her skin during her rejection. My mother left me information. But I hoped maybe, but I wasn't sure. I'm sure, Liana interrupted firmly. I've studied the old bloodlines my entire life. Moon-blessed omegas are rare, appearing maybe once every 3 or 4 generations. They're shift-locked until their power fully manifests, marked by pale coloring and bonded exclusively to alphas of exceptional strength. Twin alphas, especially the goddess, chooses triad bonds for her most powerful vessels. She leaned forward, her expression intense. What happened in your pack wasn't rejection of a cursed omega. It was a shallow alpha failing to recognize a gift from the goddess herself. And now that gift has found its way to alphas worthy of receiving it. Sarah's mind spun. Fated mates, moon-blessed power, a triad bond with twin alphas who'd saved her life. It was too much to process after everything she'd been through. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as dizziness washed over her. Liana's hand steadied her gently. You need rest. Your body has been through severe trauma. The hypothermia alone should have killed you. The fact that you survived 3 days in wilderness with minimal supplies speaks to an inner strength most wolves never develop. She adjusted pillows behind Sarah's back. But even moon-blessed omegas need time to heal. When can I meet them? The question came out before Sarah could stop it. The alphas, KL and Thorn. They've been checking on you every few hours, Liana said with amusement. Drove me half mad with their hovering until I banned them from the healing ward unless there was actual progress to report. They're probably pacing outside right now, feeling your consciousness through the bond and waiting for permission to enter. The bond. Sarah could feel it now that she was paying attention, 2 threads of awareness connecting her to presences elsewhere in the fortress. One felt controlled and intense, like barely leashed power. The other felt calculating and warm simultaneously, like a strategist who genuinely cared about the pieces on his board. KL and Thorn, her mates, her fated mates. I want to see them, Sarah decided. Please. Liana studied her for a long moment and then nodded. Brief visit only. You still need rest. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The Ashford Pack sent an official inquiry 3 days ago asking if we'd encountered their exiled Omega. Kale and Thorn sent back a very diplomatic response that essentially told them to go to hell. You're under Ravenclaw protection now. No one can touch you here without going through 2 of the most dangerous alphas in the Northern Territories first. Warmth spread through Sarah's chest. Gratitude and something that might have been the beginning of belonging. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the goddess for leading you to alphas who actually deserve you. Liana opened the door and leaned out. She's awake and asking for you. 10 minutes, then she rests again. Footsteps approached immediately, 2 sets perfectly synchronized. Then Kyle and Thorn filled the doorway, both still and alert, their amber eyes locked on Sarah with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. They'd cleaned up since the rescue. Both wore simple clothing, dark pants, and long-sleeved shirts that emphasized their warrior builds. The scar through Kyle's left eyebrow was the only way to tell them apart at a glance, though Sarah suspected she'd learn their individual mannerisms soon enough. Hi, she said, because what else did you say to the fated mates who'd saved your life? Hi, Thorn echoed, his mouth quirking with amusement. How are you feeling? Like I almost froze to death, Sarah said honestly, but alive. Thanks to you both. Kale moved closer, his movements careful and non-threatening. We weren't sure you'd make it. Your core temperature was dangerously low when we found you. Liana said another hour and... He stopped, jaw tightening. But you didn't wait another hour, Sarah finished. You found me in time. The bond led us, Thorn explained, remaining near the doorway. We were on routine patrol when both of us felt something pulling us east. Like an instinct we couldn't ignore. Followed it for 2 miles and found you collapsed against that tree. Sarah processed this. The bond had activated before they'd even touched her. Before conscious recognition. The goddess had literally guided them to find her. So this us, its real fated mates. As real as it gets, Kale confirmed. He stopped beside her bed, close enough to touch, but carefully keeping his hands to himself. The question is what you want to do about it. Sarah blinked. What I want, Sam, you've been through hell, Thorn said quietly. Rejected by 1 pack. Exiled. Nearly died in wilderness. Now you wake up to discover you're bonded to 2 alphas you've never met. We're not going to pressure you into anything. The mate bond exists, but how we proceed from here is entirely your choice. The consideration in his voice, the absolute refusal to assume her compliance despite the bond's existence, it was so different from Darius's entitled expectations that Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. "What are my options?" she asked. Kale and Thorne exchanged glances. Some twin communication passed between them before Kale spoke. "Option 1. You rest and recover here as long as you need, then we help you reach neutral territories or whatever destination you choose. The bond will hurt when we're separated, but it's survivable if you want nothing to do with us." "Option 2, Thorne continued. You stay in Ravenclaw territory as a protected guest. Get to know us and the pack without any expectations of bonding. Take time to decide if this is something you actually want, not just something the goddess decided for you." "Option 3, Kale finished. You accept the mate bond and begin the process of integration into our pack as Luna. But that only happens if and when you're ready, not before." Sarah stared at them both. They were offering her choice, agency, the power to decide her own future despite the mate bond's existence. After 23 years of being controlled and dictated to after being treated like property, to be traded, they were giving her the one thing she'd never had, freedom to choose. "I need time," she said slowly. "I need to understand what this bond actually means. What being Luna would require. What you expect from a mate." "Take all the time you need," Thorne said immediately. "We've waited 28 years for you. We can wait longer." "But while I'm deciding," Sarah added, "I want to learn about this pack, about you both, about what Moonblessed actually means beyond old stories in my mother's journal." Kale's expression softened fractionally. "Liana can teach you about Moonblessed powers. Thorne can explain pack politics and Luna responsibilities. I can teach you combat because no mate of mine is going to be helpless whether or not you eventually accept the bond." "Combat," Sarah repeated. "You survived 3 days in winter wilderness with nothing but a knife and stubbornness," Kale said. "Imagine what you could do with actual training. Fated mate or not, you're clearly a fighter. Might as well learn to fight it properly." Something fierce and warm unfurled inside Sarah. He saw her as a fighter, not as fragile Omega who needed sheltering. He was offering to make her dangerous on her own terms. "I want that," she said firmly. "All of it. Teach me to fight. Teach me about being Luna. Help me understand this moon-blessed power. And at the end, whenever that is, I'll decide about the bond." "Deal," both twins said simultaneously. Liana cleared her throat from the doorway. "And on that note, your 10 minutes are up. Out. She needs rest." Kale and Thorne moved toward the door immediately, but Thorne paused to look back. "The bond goes both ways, Serafina. We can feel what you feel, not thoughts, but emotions. If you need us for anything, you just have to call through the bond, and we'll come. No questions asked." Then they were gone, and Sarah was alone with Liana again. The healer smiled knowingly. "That went well?" "They gave me choice," Sarah said, still processing. "They actually gave me choice." "Of course they did. They're not Darius Blackthorn." Liana adjusted Sarah's blankets. "Now rest. Your body needs sleep to finish healing, and you'll start training soon enough. KL's combat sessions are legendary for being brutal, but effective." Sarah let her eyes drift closed, feeling the dual presence of her mates through the bond. They felt protective, impatient, hovering somewhere nearby, but respecting her space. It was nothing like what she'd expected bonding to feel like. It felt right. The next 3 weeks passed in intensive learning that transformed Sarah in ways she hadn't known were possible. Mornings belonged to Liana, who taught her about moon-blessed history and helped her explore the power building inside her. They started with meditation, learning to sense the silver fire that lived beneath her skin, then progressed to simple healing. Sarah discovered she could close minor wounds just by focusing intention through her hands, though it left her exhausted afterward. "Power requires training like any muscle," Liana explained. "Right now, you're moon-blessed potential. By the time we're done, you'll be moon-blessed realized." Afternoons belonged to Kyle, who kept his promise about teaching her to fight. The training yard became Sarah's second home as she learned basic combat stances, how to throw a punch without breaking her hand, how to use leverage against opponents larger than herself. Kale was merciless in training, but patient in instruction. When she failed, which was often, he simply made her try again until muscle memory developed. When she succeeded, his rare smiles felt like victories worth celebrating. "You're getting dangerous," he commented 3 weeks in after Sarah had successfully pinned a mid-level warrior named Eric using a combination they'd practiced. "Another month, and you'll be beating half the warrior class." The pack had started calling her Luna, despite no official bonding ceremony. They recognized what she was to their alphas, recognized the mate bond's authenticity, even without marks to prove it. Warriors nodded respect as she passed. Omega smiled at her warmly. Children looked at her white hair with curiosity rather than fear. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt accepted. Not tolerated, not pitied, but genuinely accepted for exactly who she was. Evenings belonged to Thorne, who taught her pack politics over dinner in the twins' private chambers. He explained territorial boundaries, alliance structures, the delicate balance of power that kept the northern packs from constant warfare. Being Luna isn't just about carrying the Alpha's pups, he said bluntly. It's about being the other half of pack leadership. You'll make decisions that affect hundreds of lives. You'll negotiate treaties, settle disputes, protect the vulnerable. It requires intelligence and strength in equal measure. Do you think I can do it? Sarah asked. Thorne's amber eyes held hers steadily. I think you rejected your entire pack rather than accept treatment that violated your dignity. I think you survived exile in winter wilderness through competence and willpower. You're more than capable of being Luna. The question is whether you want to be. Late nights, Sarah studied her mother's journal and tested her growing powers in private. The silver fire came easier now, responding to her will, rather than just flaring during moments of stress. She could light candles with a thought, could sense emotions from nearby wolves if she focused, could heal cuts that would normally take days to close. She was becoming something more than ordinary Omega, something powerful. And through it all, the mate bond hummed constantly, connecting her to Kale's controlled intensity and Thorne's calculating warmth. She felt them even when they weren't physically present, felt their concern when she pushed too hard in training, felt their pride when she succeeded at something difficult. They never pushed for more, never demanded she accept the bond beyond what she was ready for. But the attraction built daily, nonetheless, physical need increasing as she spent time in their presence, learning their personalities, seeing how they led their pack with strength tempered by genuine care. Kale was the warrior, direct, physical, protective to the point of possessiveness. He showed love through actions rather than words, teaching her to defend herself because keeping her safe mattered more than keeping her dependent. Thorne was the strategist, calculating, verbal, protective in different ways. He showed love through challenge, pushing her intellectually because he saw her potential and refused to let her settle for less. Together, they created a balance that called to something deep inside her. They were worthy of her submission, of her trust, of the bond the goddess had created between them. By the end of the third week, Sarah had made her decision. The fortress bath chamber was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Steam rose from heated pools carved directly into mountain stone, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where reality seemed to soften at the edges. Soft illumination came from clusters of luminescent crystals embedded in the walls, natural formations that the Ravenclaw pack had incorporated into their architecture centuries ago. Sarah sat on the edge of the largest pool, her feet dangling in water, heated by underground thermal springs. She'd been at Ravenclaw Fortress for 3 weeks now, and her body had transformed from the half-frozen, starving creature Kale and Thorne had rescued into something that actually felt alive again. Her pale skin had lost its grayish hypothermic tinge. Her white hair, properly washed and cared for, fell in thick waves past her shoulders. The hollows beneath her cheekbones had filled out with regular meals. The bruises and cuts from her wilderness ordeal had healed completely, leaving her unblemished, except for thin scars on her fingertips from the frostbite badges of survival, rather than marks of shame. She looked healthy, strong even, but more importantly, she felt different inside. 3 weeks of warrior training under Kael's patient instruction had built muscle where she'd only had softness before. 3 weeks of sitting in on pack councils with Thorne had sharpened her understanding of politics and strategy. 3 weeks of studying with Liana had opened her mind to healing arts and confirmed what she'd suspected about being moon-blessed rather than cursed. And 3 weeks of being near her fated mates without being claimed had built a tension inside her that was becoming impossible to ignore. The mate bond hummed constantly now, a living connection between the three of them that grew stronger daily. She could sense Kael's controlled intensity even when he was across the fortress, could feel Thorne's calculating focus during council meetings, could track their emotions through invisible threads that tied her consciousness to theirs. They felt her too. She knew because their eyes tracked her movement whenever they were in the same room, because their control would slip, sometimes revealing hunger so intense it made her breath catch, because late at night she could feel their desire through the bond burning like banked coals just waiting for permission to ignite. But they'd kept their promise. They hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded, had given her space to heal, to train, to decide when she was ready. Tonight she was ready. The decision had solidified during training that afternoon. Sarah had been sparring with Eric, who'd become her regular training partner as her skills improved. They'd been going through complex defensive sequences when Eric made a comment about her progress. "You're getting dangerous, Luna," he'd said with genuine admiration. "Another month of this, and you'll be beating half the warrior class." Luna. The pack had started calling her that after the first week, despite no official bonding ceremony. They recognized what she was to their alphas, recognized the mate bond's authenticity even without marks to prove it. Kale had been observing from the side of the training yard. His silver eyes had tracked every movement, watching Sarah defend and counter, and finally pin Eric with a combination they'd practiced repeatedly. When she'd looked up, flushed with victory and endorphins, their gazes had locked across the distance. The desire that blazed through the bond in that moment had nearly driven her to her knees. She'd felt his hunger, his pride in her growing strength, his barely restrained need to claim what was his, and underneath it all, his iron determination to wait until she gave permission, no matter how much it cost him. That control, that respect, that absolute refusal to take what she hadn't freely offered, it had shattered her last reservations. She wanted them, both of them, wanted to complete the bond that pulled at her constantly, wanted to know what it felt like to be claimed by alphas who saw her as powerful rather than defective, who'd waited patiently for her consent rather than demanding submission, who'd proven they were worthy of her. Sarah rose from the pool's edge and moved to the changing area where Liana had laid out fresh clothing. But instead of dressing, she studied her reflection in the polished metal mirror mounted on the wall, white hair still damp from bathing, lavender eyes bright with decision, pale skin that seemed to glow in the crystal light. She looked like herself, unusual, different, unmistakably other. But for the first time in her life, she saw beauty in that difference rather than defect. She was moon-blessed. The old stories in her mother's journal had convinced her. The way her hands sometimes glowed with faint silver light when she was healing minor injuries convinced her. The increasing sense of power building inside her, waiting for the right trigger to fully manifest, convinced her. She wasn't cursed. She'd never been cursed. She'd been marked by the goddess for purposes she was only beginning to understand. And tonight she would claim her mates. Sarah dressed in simple clothing, soft pants, and a loose tunic that would be easy to remove. No elaborate seduction outfit. No attempt to be something she wasn't. Just herself, confident in the decision she'd made. She left the bath chamber and moved through Ravenclaw Fortress with purpose. Warriors nodded respect as she passed. Omega attendants smiled at her, no longer seeing a cursed outsider, but their future Luna. The pack had accepted her more fully in 3 weeks than her birth pack had in 23 years. The twins' private chambers were in the fortress's highest tower, a suite of rooms that offered commanding views of the mountain territories while providing absolute privacy. Sarah had been invited there multiple times for strategy discussions and late-night conversations, but she'd never entered after dark, never crossed the threshold when the space transformed from public meeting area to private sanctuary. Tonight would be different. She climbed the spiral staircase with her heart pounding harder with each step. Not from fear, she'd moved past fear weeks ago. This was anticipation, excitement, the electric charge of knowing something momentous was about to happen. Sarah reached the heavy wooden door that marked the entrance to their chambers. Through the mate bond, she could feel both alphas inside. Their awareness of her presence spiked immediately, surprise and hope flooding through the connection. She knocked once, firm, clear, certain. Footsteps approached. The door opened to reveal Thorn dressed casually in dark pants and an open shirt that showed the muscled planes of his chest. His amber eyes widened slightly when he saw her, then darkened with understanding as he read the expression on her face. Sarah. Her name came out rough. "It's late. Is everything—" "I'm ready," she said simply. "I choose you both, but I'm in control tonight." Behind Thorn, she heard Kael's sharp intake of breath. Both alphas went absolutely still, the kind of predatory stillness that preceded explosive action. Thorn's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Are you absolutely certain there's no pressure? We can wait as long as—" "I'm certain," Sarah interrupted. She stepped forward, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. 3 weeks ago, I was half dead in the snow, barely surviving. Tonight, I'm strong. I'm trained. I know my worth. And I know I want this bond completed." She pushed past him into the chambers, and Thorn let her his control visible in every tense line of his body. Kael stood near the fireplace, bare-chested, his hair damp from recent bathing. The scar through his left eyebrow was stark in the firelight. His silver eyes blazed as he tracked her movement into the room. "We need to hear you say it clearly," Kael said, voice rough with restraint. We need explicit consent, no ambiguity. Sarah turned to face them both. Two identical alphas, powerful and dangerous, and completely focused on her. The mate bond burned between them like a living thing pulling taut with years of waiting and weeks of building tension. I, Seraphina Ashford, give consent for Kale and Thorn Ravenclaw to claim me as their mate, she said formally. Then she smiled, something fierce and challenging. But like I said, I'm in control tonight. That's my condition. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Heat replaced tension. Hunger replaced restraint. Both alphas moved toward her with synchronized grace that spoke to their twin connection. Control, Thorn repeated, circling to her right while Kale approached from the left. What exactly does that mean, little Omega? It means I decide the pace, Sarah said, turning to keep both of them in view. Her heart raced, but not with fear. With power. With the intoxicating knowledge that these two dominant alphas would submit to her direction because they respected her enough to let her lead. It means you follow my instructions. It means if I say stop, you stop immediately. So agreed, they said in unison. It means, Sarah continued, reaching up to unfasten her tunic with deliberate slowness, that I'm going to learn exactly how my body responds to both of you. And you're going to be patient while I figure out what I like. The tunic fell to the floor. She wore nothing beneath it, a calculated choice that made both alphas' eyes darken with pure hunger. Kale moved first, stepping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest. May I touch you? The question asked, despite his obvious need, made something warm bloom in Sarah's chest. Yes. His hands came up slowly, giving her time to refuse before settling on her waist. His palms were warm and calloused from weapon work, rough against her soft skin. He didn't grab or squeeze, just held her carefully like something precious that might break under too much pressure. You're perfect, he murmured, silver eyes traveling over her pale skin with reverence rather than disgust. Every inch of you. Thorn approached from behind his presence, a solid wall of heat at her back. May I swim? Yes. His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs brushing the sides of her neck where claiming marks would go. The touch sent electricity racing down her spine. Sarah's breath caught her body, responding to dual stimulation from alphas who surrounded her completely. How does this feel? Thorn asked, his breath warm against her ear. Good, Sarah managed. Don't stop. Kale's hands began exploring, slowly tracing her waist, her ribs, the curve of her hips, learning her responses through touch and the feedback from the mate bond. When his thumbs brushed the underside of her breasts, Sarah gasped, and both alphas growled softly in response to her pleasure. Thorn's mouth found her neck, kissing along the column of her throat without biting. Gentle exploration rather than claiming. His hands slid down her arms, then back up to cup her breasts from behind, while Kale's hands mapped her stomach and hips. 4 hands on her body, 2 sources of heat surrounding her, the mate bond amplifying every sensation until Sarah felt drunk on it, and they'd barely started. More, she breathed. I want more. Tell us exactly what you want, Kale said against her lips, his mouth hovering close without closing the distance. We need to hear you say it. I want... Sarah's thoughts scattered as Thorn's fingers found her nipples circling with perfect pressure. I want to kiss you. Both of you. Kale claimed her mouth immediately, and Sarah understood why people talked about mate bonds like religious experiences. The kiss sent shockwaves through her entire body, pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. She could feel his taste, his hunger, his absolute devotion through the bond as his tongue swept into her mouth. When he finally pulled back, she was panting. Thorn turned her in their arms, so she faced him instead and claimed her mouth with different energy, slower, more calculating, but no less consuming. His kiss was thorough, exploratory, learning every response before building intensity. They passed her between them like that, taking turns kissing her breathless, while the other's hands explored her body with increasing boldness. Sarah lost track of time, lost track of everything except sensation and the building pressure between her legs that demanded relief. I need... She couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by need. Tell us, Kale commanded gently. We'll give you anything, but you have to tell us what you need. Touch me, Sarah gasped. Between my legs, please. Thorn's hand slid down her stomach, slowly giving her time to refuse. When she didn't, his fingers found the heat between her thighs, and his groan of appreciation made her knees weak. So wet already, he murmured against her neck. Your body knows what it needs. His fingers explored carefully, learning her anatomy through touch. When he found the sensitive bundle of nerves and circled it with perfect pressure, Sarah cried out, her body convulsing with pleasure, so intense she would have fallen if Kale wasn't supporting her weight. That's it, Kale encouraged, his hands cupping her breasts while Thorn worked between her legs. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself have pleasure without shame. The dual stimulation built quickly, both alphas coordinating their touches through some twin intuition that let them work together seamlessly. Thorn's fingers circled and pressed, while Kale's mouth found her neck, teeth scraping without breaking, skin hands kneading her breast with increasing pressure. Sarah's first orgasm hit like a lightning strike, sudden, overwhelming, consuming. She screamed, her body arching between them, waves of pleasure crashing through her with intensity she hadn't known was possible. The mate bond amplified everything, letting her feel echoes of their satisfaction at her pleasure, creating a feedback loop that prolonged her climax until she was shaking and gasping. When the waves finally subsided, she sagged against Kale's chest, trembling with aftershocks. Both alphas held her carefully, hands soothing, rather than arousing, now murmuring praise and comfort while she recovered. "Holy goddess," Sarah breathed when she could form words again. Thorn's laugh was rough. "And we've barely started, little mate." Kale swept her into his arms effortlessly and carried her toward the massive bed that dominated the far side of the chamber. He laid her down on furs so soft they felt like clouds, then stood back with Thorn to let her decide what happened next. "Your control," Kale reminded her. "What do you want?" Sarah looked at them both, two powerful alphas standing at the foot of the bed, barely leashed, hunger visible in every tense line of their bodies, waiting for her direction. The power in that moment was intoxicating. "Take off your pants," she ordered to both of you. "I want to see what I'm dealing with." "We'll go slow," Thorn said, reading her expression. "As slow as you need. It'll hurt at first, but we'll make it as good as we can." "I trust you," Sarah said, and realized it was absolutely true. She trusted these alphas completely with her body, her pleasure, her safety. They'd earned that trust through weeks of patience and respect. She gestured for them to join her on the bed. "Kale first. I want you inside me first." The choice was instinctive. Kyle had been her combat trainer, had taught her to trust her body's strength. She wanted him to be the one who taught her body pleasure as well. Kale settled beside her, propping himself on one elbow so he could see her face clearly. "May I touch you?" "Yes, everywhere." His hands began exploring again, this time without clothing as a barrier. He mapped every inch of her pale skin, learning what made her gasp and what made her arch into his touch. His mouth followed his hands, kissing her throat, her collarbone, taking one nipple into his mouth and sucking until she writhed beneath him. Thorn positioned himself at her other side, hands joining Kyle's in their exploration. Between them, they reduced Sarah to gasping, desperate need. Every nerve ending felt electrified. Every touch sent pleasure cascading through her body and echoing through the mate bond. "Please," Sarah finally begged when the need became unbearable. "Kale, please." He moved over her, settling between her thighs with careful control. One hand cupped her face while the other guided himself into position. His silver eyes locked on hers, holding her gaze with intensity that took her breath away. "Breathe," he commanded softly, "and tell me immediately if it's too much." He pushed forward slowly, and Sarah felt herself stretching around him. The burn was intense, her virgin body protesting the intrusion. She tensed involuntarily, and Kale stopped immediately. "Breathe," he repeated. "Your body was made for this. Made to take your mates. Trust yourself." Sarah forced herself to relax, to breathe through the discomfort. Kale waited with infinite patience, not moving until he felt her body adjust. Then he pushed forward another inch and another, working himself deeper with agonizing slowness. The resistance inside her gave way, suddenly a sharp pain that made Sarah cry out. Kale froze, his entire body trembling with the effort of holding still. "Are you okay?" His voice was strained. "Do you need me to stop?" "No," Sarah gasped. The pain was already fading, transforming into something that wasn't quite pleasure, but wasn't exactly pain either. "Keep going. I want all of you." He resumed his careful advance until he was fully seated inside her, both of them breathing hard. The fullness was overwhelming. Sarah felt impossibly stretched, claimed in the most fundamental way possible. "You're mine now," Kale said roughly. "Mine and Thorn's, forever." He began to move slow, careful thrusts that let her body adjust to his size. Thorn's hand stroked her breasts and stomach, providing additional stimulation while his brother claimed her. The combination of sensations built rapidly, pain fading into pleasure, fullness transforming into need. Sarah's hands clutched at Kale's shoulders, nails digging into his skin as the pleasure built. She could feel something swelling at the base of his length, his knot forming in preparation for locking them together. The knowledge that she was about to be tied to him, bound completely, sent her arousal spiking higher. "That's it," Kale encouraged as her inner walls began fluttering around him. "Come for me. Let me feel you." His knot swelled fully and locked them together just as Sarah's second orgasm crashed through her. She screamed his name back, arching body convulsing around him. The mate bond blazed with silver light visible now, threads of power connecting them permanently. Kale's own release followed immediately, his body shuddering as he spilled inside her, the knot, ensuring everything stayed exactly where it belonged. Heat flooded her, marking her internally as thoroughly as the bite mark would mark her externally. When the initial waves subsided, they were locked together, both trembling with aftershocks. The mate bond between them pulsed with new strength, permanent, unbreakable, absolute. Mine, Kale murmured, kissing her forehead gently. My mate, my Luna. Sarah could only nod, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. She'd been claimed, bonded, marked as belonging to an alpha who'd proven worthy of her submission, and they were only halfway done. The knot held them locked together for nearly 30 minutes. Kale used the time to kiss her slowly, thoroughly, letting her feel his reverence through the bond. Thorn remained beside them, hands stroking her hair and face, praising her courage and strength in taking her first claiming. When the knot finally began to recede, Kale withdrew carefully. Sarah whimpered at the emptiness, her body already missing the fullness. I know, Kale soothed, but Thorn's going to fill you again soon. You won't be empty long. He moved aside and Thorn took his place between her thighs. His amber eyes glowed in the firelight, hunger barely restrained despite watching his brother claim their mate. My turn, Thorn said, voice rough with need. May I? Yes, Sarah breathed. Yes, I want you too. He entered her more easily than Kyle had, her body already stretched and slick from the first claiming. But the sensation was still overwhelming, still almost too much to bear. Thorn's rhythm was different from his brother's, slower and more deliberate, each thrust calculated for maximum pleasure. He angled his hips differently, finding a spot inside her that made Sarah see stars. She cried out and his smile was pure satisfaction. Found it, he murmured. Going to make you scream again, little mate. He proved his point, ruthlessly hitting that internal spot with perfect precision until Sarah was writhing beneath him, incoherent with pleasure. Kale's hands joined his brother's, stimulating her breasts, while Thorn worked between her legs, both of them focused entirely on her pleasure. Her third orgasm built slower, but crashed harder, pleasure so intense it bordered on painful. She screamed through it, her body clenching around Thorn desperately. His knot swelled and locked them together just as his own release hit, and a second mate bond blazed into existence alongside the first. Now she was connected to both of them. Permanently, completely. The bonds hummed with power, tying her consciousness to theirs in ways she was only beginning to understand. When Thorn's knot finally released them, Sarah lay boneless and exhausted between her two alphas, utterly spent. Every muscle felt liquid. Her body ached in ways that were entirely new, but not unpleasant, the good ache of being thoroughly used. How do you feel? Kale asked softly, brushing damp hair back from her face. Complete, Sarah whispered. I feel complete. And she did. The bonds hummed contentedly inside her chest, connecting her to Kale's controlled strength and Thorn's calculating intelligence. She could feel their satisfaction, their possessive pride in claiming their mate, their growing love that would only deepen with time. She'd been rejected as defective, cast aside as cursed, exiled to die alone in winter wilderness. And she'd found her way to alphas who saw her true worth, who'd waited for her consent, who'd let her control her own claiming, who'd proven themselves worthy of the gift she'd given them tonight. Sleep, Thorn murmured, pulling furs over all three of them. You've earned rest. We'll be here when you wake. Sarah let herself drift, surrounded by warmth and safety and the steady rhythm of two heartbeats that now felt like extensions of her own. She'd been claimed, bonded, marked as belonging, but more importantly, she'd chosen. She'd maintained her agency throughout, had controlled every step of her own claiming, had proven that submission, freely given, was the most powerful gift of all. Tomorrow she would begin truly integrating into pack life as Luna, would start learning the full extent of her moon-blessed powers, would face the challenges that came with being mated to twin alpha commanders. But tonight she was simply Sarah, claimed Omega, completed mate, woman who'd survived rejection and exile to find something infinitely better than what she'd lost. The fire burned low. The bonds pulsed contentedly. Her alphas held her close. And for the first time in 23 years, Serafina Ashford slept without fear, without shame, without doubt about her place in the world. She was exactly where she belonged. 4 months after the claiming, Serafina Ashford Ravenclaw stood in the fortress training yard and understood that everything was about to change again. The morning had started normally enough. Sunrise combat drills with the warrior class where Sarah demonstrated the defensive combination that had taken her weeks to master. The warriors had whooped their approval when she'd successfully pinned Kyle, her own mate and combat instructor, using a leverage technique he'd taught her himself. "You're officially dangerous now, Luna," Eric had called out, grinning. "First Omega to ever beat an Alpha commander in open sparring." Sra had felt flush with pride and endorphins, the mate bonds humming with Kale's satisfaction at her progress, and Thorne's amusement from wherever he was handling morning pack business. Life had settled into comfortable routine over the past 4 months. Mornings training, afternoons learning Luna duties, settling disputes, organizing healing clinics, negotiating with neighboring packs. Evenings in private with her mates, deepening bonds that grew stronger daily. Nights thoroughly claimed in ways that still made her blush to remember. She'd grown into her role as Luna more naturally than she'd expected. The Ravenclaw pack respected competence over tradition, and Sarah had proven herself competent repeatedly. When she'd proposed an Omega combat training program, the Council had approved it immediately. When she'd negotiated a peace treaty with the Eastern Territories that Kael and Thorne had been struggling with for years, they'd looked at her with something like awe. She was moon-blessed Luna of one of the most powerful packs in the Northern Rockies, mated to twin Alpha commanders who worshipped her, respected by warriors and civilians alike. For someone who'd been called cursed and exiled 4 months ago, it felt like living in a dream. Then the messenger had arrived at mid-morning, and the dream shattered. Sarah had been in the healing ward with Liana practicing advanced silver fire techniques when a young warrior burst through the doors with panic written across his face. "Luna Commander Thorne requests your immediate presence in the Great Hall. The warrior swallowed hard. "There's a delegation at our gates from Blackthorn Pack, led by Alpha Darius Blackthorn himself." The world seemed to stop. Liana's hand had gripped Sarah's shoulder. "Breathe, you're not that Omega anymore. You're Luna here with two of the most dangerous Alphas in the territories standing between you and him." But Sarah's hands had started glowing with involuntary silver firepower, responding to sudden fear and rage. "Darius, here." After everything he'd said, everything he'd done, he'd come to Ravenclaw territory. "Why, Poya," Sarah managed. The messenger looked uncomfortable. "He's demanding an audience with you, specifically Luna. Says there's been a mistake. That the Blackthorn Ashford contract is still legally binding. That you need to return with him to fulfill your obligations." White-hot fury burned through Sarah's veins. "My obligations. He rejected me publicly. Called me cursed. I was exiled. He's claiming the rejection wasn't finalized because..." The messenger hesitated. "Because you rejected the pact before he could officially complete the rejection ceremony. Says that means the betrothal contract remains valid." It was legal nonsense. Pack law didn't work that way. But Sarah understood immediately what Darius was actually doing. He'd learned she was mated to powerful Ravenclaw Alphas, and now wanted the alliance he'd thrown away. She'd been right in the Great Hall 4 months ago. They'd all wished they'd seen what she actually was before they threw her away. "Tell Thorne I'm on my way," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the silver fire still flickering across her hands. "And tell him Darius doesn't leave this fortress alive if he threatens me." The messenger's eyes widened, but he nodded and fled. Liana studied Sarah with approval. "That's Luna authority. But control your power before you face him. Don't let him see how much he still affects you." Sarah took several deep breaths, forcing the silver fire to recede back beneath her skin. When her hands stopped glowing, she straightened her spine and lifted her chin in the gesture that had become her signature. The same posture she'd held during her rejection, during her exile, during every moment when someone expected her to break. She wouldn't break for Darius Blackthorn then. She certainly wouldn't break for him now. The Great Hall of Ravenclaw Fortress was significantly more impressive than Ashford's had been. Massive stone pillars supported a vaulted ceiling carved with images of ancient wolves and moon goddesses. Winter sunlight streamed through high windows, catching on weapon displays and pack banners that hung as reminders of centuries of victories. Kale and Thorne stood at the center of the hall, side by side in full commander regalia, leather armor marked with the Ravenclaw insignia, weapons visible at their hips, expressions carved from stone. They looked every inch the deadly alpha warriors they were. Before them, maintaining careful distance, stood Darius Blackthorn with a contingent of 30 pack members. His expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the flash of calculation in his dark eyes as she entered through the side door. She dressed deliberately after the messenger left, not in the practical training clothes she'd been wearing, but in formal Luna attire. Deep blue dress that emphasized her coloring rather than hiding it, silver jewelry that caught the light hair braided with moon charms that marked her status. She looked exactly like what she was, Luna, of a powerful pack, moon-blessed Omega mated to Alphas, who commanded respect across territories. She looked nothing like the broken Omega Darius had rejected 4 months ago. Every head turned as she entered. Pack members lined the walls, Ravenclaw warriors and civilians who'd gathered when word spread that their Luna's former intended had arrived making demands. They watched with the kind of protective attention that came from genuine loyalty rather than forced submission. Sarah moved to stand between Kael and Thorn. Both her mate's hands came to rest on her Kael's on her lower back, Thorn's on her shoulder, claiming touches that announced exactly who she belonged to now. Through the mate bonds, she felt their barely controlled rage, felt Kael's desire to simply kill Darius for daring to appear in their territory, felt Thorn's calculating assessment of how to handle this politically without starting a war. She sent calm through both bonds, a reminder that she was strong enough to face this herself. Alpha Blackthorn. Sarah said, her voice carrying through the hall with Luna authority she'd spent 4 months developing. You're a long way from your territories. Explain your presence here. Darius's eyes traveled over her, and she saw the moment recognition truly hit. This wasn't the pale, trembling Omega he remembered. This was something else entirely, something powerful that he'd failed to recognize and now clearly regretted rejecting. Lady Seraphina, he began, notably not using her Luna title. I've come to correct a terrible mistake. The only mistake, Sarah interrupted coldly, was yours. In case your memory is faulty, let me refresh it. You stood before 200 witnesses and called me an abomination. Said my bloodline was cursed. Said you'd rather see me dead than bound to you. Those were your words. Darius had the grace to look uncomfortable. I spoke in haste. My father had pressured me into the arrangement, and I reacted badly to my appearance, Sarah finished. You couldn't handle that your intended mate didn't look like every other Omega. So you publicly humiliated me and ensured I'd be exiled from my birth pack. About that, Darius said, shifting tactics. His voice took on a tone he probably thought sounded reasonable. The betrothal contract between Ashford and Blackthorn packs was legally binding. Your exile doesn't nullify existing agreements. As your intended mate, I have the right to petition for your return. Thorn's laugh was cold enough to frost the air. Are you actually claiming legal rights to a woman you rejected? The rejection ceremony wasn't completed, Darius insisted. She walked out before Elder Marcus could pronounce the bond dissolved, which means technically the betrothal stands. Technically, Kael repeated, voice deadly soft. Our Luna is mated to both of us. Mate bonds supersede all prior contracts, as you'd know if you understood pack law beyond whatever your lawyers told you to say. Darius's jaw tightened. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make amends. Seraphina, you and I can— Luna, Sarah corrected sharply. You will address me by my proper title, or you will leave my territory immediately. The emphasis on my territory made Darius's eyes flash with irritation. Good. Let him be irritated. Let him feel a fraction of the humiliation he had inflicted on her. Luna Seraphina, Darius tried again, forcing courtesy through gritted teeth. I've come to propose a compromise. The Blackthorn pack recognizes that circumstances have changed. However, the alliance between Blackthorn and Ashford territories was meant to benefit both packs. Your current situation with Ravenclaw creates complications. My situation, Sarah repeated dangerously, silver fire beginning to flicker across her fingertips, is that I'm mated to Alphas who actually deserve me. Alphas who saw past my appearance to recognize divine marking. Alphas who waited for my consent rather than demanding submission based on political contracts. The silver fire grew brighter, visible to everyone in the hall. Several Blackthorn pack members shifted nervously. They'd heard rumors about the Ravenclaw Luna being moon-blessed, but seeing the proof was different from hearing stories. Darius stared at the flames dancing across Sarah's hands, and she watched comprehension dawn in his eyes. Comprehension and regret and desperate calculation. You're moon-blessed, he breathed. The white coloring wasn't a curse. It was divine marking. Sarah finished. Yes, the thing every wolf in my birth pack should have recognized. The thing you were too shallow and ignorant to see. I told you in that great hall that you'd wish you'd seen what I actually was before you threw me away. Did you think I was bluffing? She let the silver fire build, let it dance higher across her hands and arms, let every wolf in the room see goddess power made manifest. The temperature in the hall rose. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. I am moon-blessed, Sarah declared, her voice echoing with more than human authority. Marked by the goddess herself, bonded to twin alphas of exceptional strength, Luna of Ravenclaw pack. And you, Darius Blackthorn, are nothing but a shallow alpha who failed to recognize a gift when it was offered to you. Darius took an involuntary step backward. Around him, his pack members looked increasingly nervous. They'd come expecting to retrieve a cursed Omega. Instead, they were facing a Luna who wielded ancient power and had the backing of two of the most dangerous alphas in the territories. I didn't know, Darius tried. If I'd known, you'd what? Sarah demanded. Suddenly found me acceptable, seen past my appearance to my value number. You only want me now because I've proven powerful despite your rejection. Because being mated to a moon-blessed Luna would elevate your pack's status. Because you miscalculated badly and now you're trying to salvage what you can. She let the silver fire flare once more, then pulled it back under control. The answer is no. I will never return to Blackthorn Pack. I will never acknowledge any claim you think you have. And if you continue harassing me or my pack, I will ensure every alpha in the Northern Territories knows exactly how spectacularly you failed when the goddess gave you a gift. Darius's face flushed with rage and embarrassment. You can't threaten. That wasn't a threat, Kale interrupted, his voice carrying enough alpha command to make every wolf in the room flinch. That was a promise. You're in our territory making claims on our mate. The only reason you're still breathing is because our Luna has more self-control than I do. Leave now, Thorn added, his tone colder than his brother's. And consider this your only warning. Seraphina Ashford Ravenclaw is under Ravenclaw protection permanently. Any further attempts to petition for her return will be considered acts of aggression against our pack. Are we clear? For a moment, Sarah thought Darius might argue further. She saw him weighing options, calculating whether pushing harder might yield different results. Then he made a mistake. This isn't over, Darius said, his eyes fixed on Sarah. The alliance between our territories was meant to benefit all northern packs. Your refusal creates instability. Then find another Omega, Sarah snapped. There are hundreds who'd be thrilled to mate with an alpha like you. Oh wait, they'd have to overlook the fact that you publicly rejected your intended and then tried to reclaim her when she became powerful enough to matter. Good luck with that. Darius's control finally cracked. He took 3 steps towards Sarah, hand outstretched, like he intended to grab her. You insolent... He never finished the sentence. Silver fire exploded from Sarah's hands with force that sent him flying backward. He crashed into 2 of his own pack members, all 3 hitting the floor hard. The flames hadn't burned him, Sarah had controlled that much, but the sheer power of the blast left no doubt about her capabilities. The great hall fell silent except for Darius's ragged breathing as he struggled to his feet. His eyes were wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Sarah stood perfectly still, hands glowing with silver, fire lavender eyes blazing with goddess-backed authority. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of power that demanded submission. You tried to touch me without permission. You came into my territory making demands. You refused to accept my clearly stated boundaries. And you seemed to labor under the delusion that I am still the Omega you rejected 4 months ago. She let the fire build higher, let the temperature in the hall spike enough that several wolves started sweating despite the winter cold outside. I am not that Omega anymore. I survived your rejection. I survived exile in winter wilderness. I survived hypothermia and starvation, and every attempt the goddess made to test whether I was worthy of this power. And I proved myself worthy, Darius. I earned this authority, this strength, these alphas who actually deserve to stand beside me. The silver fire flickered across her entire body, now making her white hair and pale skin glow, like she was carved from moonlight itself. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued, her voice absolute. You're going to leave Ravenclaw territory immediately. You're going to return to your pack and inform them that Seraphina Ashford is dead to them, that the Omega they cast aside no longer exists, that Luna Seraphina Ashford Ravenclaw is off limits permanently. She took 1 step toward Darius, who actually backed away from her. And if you ever come near me or my pack again, I will show you exactly what moon-blessed power can do when properly motivated. The goddess grants me silver fire to defend the innocent. Don't make me demonstrate how creatively I can interpret defense. For a long moment, no one moved. The entire hall seemed frozen, waiting to see if Darius would be stupid enough to challenge a Luna-wielding goddess power. He wasn't. We're leaving, Darius managed, gesturing sharply to his pack members. They scrambled to obey, clearly relieved to be escaping with their lives intact. As the Blackthorn delegation retreated toward the hall's main entrance, Darius paused one final time. He looked back at Sarah, and this time she saw genuine regret in his expression. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I was wrong about you. Catastrophically wrong. Yes, Sarah agreed coldly. You were. And you'll live the rest of your life knowing you threw away a moon-blessed mate because you couldn't see past surface differences. I hope it haunts you. Darius flinched like she'd struck him, then walked out of the great hall and out of Sarah's life permanently. The moment the doors closed behind the Blackthorn pack, the hall erupted. Ravenclaw wolves howled approval. Warriors cheered, civilians rushed forward to congratulate their Luna on standing her ground. But Sarah barely heard any of it. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation drained away, suddenly leaving her shaking. The silver fire flickered and died as her knees buckled. Kale caught her before she hit the floor, sweeping her into his arms. We've got you, he murmured against her hair. You were magnificent, but you don't have to stand alone anymore. Thorn's hand cupped her face gently. You just terrified a rival alpha and proved to everyone exactly why the goddess marked you. But now you need to rest. Using that much power takes a toll. Sarah let them carry her from the great hall surrounded by the pack's approval and her mate's protective warmth. She'd faced Darius. She'd proven her strength. She'd demonstrated that rejection hadn't broken her, it had forged her into something far more powerful. But as they climbed toward their private chambers, one thought kept circling through her mind. Darius had looked genuinely shaken when she'd blasted him with silver fire. But he'd also looked calculating, like he was already working out his next move. This wasn't over. She'd known it the moment he'd arrived making ridiculous legal claims. Men like Darius didn't give up when they realized they'd miscalculated. They escalated. He's going to come back, Sarah said quietly as Kale laid her on their bed. Both twins exchanged glances. We know, Thorn said, which is why we're doubling patrols on our borders and sending messages to allied packs. If Blackthorn tries anything aggressive, we'll have support. But next time, Kale added, sitting beside her and taking her hand, we won't be as diplomatic. Next time, we assume hostile intent and act accordingly. Sarah nodded, exhaustion pulling at her. The confrontation had drained her more than she'd realized. Using moon-blessed power at that intensity was still new, still took more energy than she'd like to admit. Sleep, Thorn commanded, gently stretching out on her other side. We'll watch over you, and when you wake, we'll start proper power training. If Blackthorn comes back, you're going to be ready to show him exactly what happens when someone threatens a fully realized moon-blessed Luna. Sarah let her eyes drift closed, feeling safe despite the lingering worry. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had her mates, her pack, her power. And she'd proven today that she was so far beyond the Omega Darius had rejected that they might as well be different people entirely. Let him come back. Let him try whatever desperate scheme he was planning. She'd burn him to ash before she'd let anyone threaten the life she'd built from the ashes of her exile. 1 month after Darius's humiliating retreat, Seraphina stood in the training yard teaching her Omega combat class when the world exploded into chaos. She'd just demonstrated a disarming technique when the alarm howls started. Mercenaries poured over the eastern wall, 30 of them coordinated and professional, and leading them desperate and furious was Darius Blackthorn. Kale and Thorn were on patrol 20 miles north. Sarah was alone with trainees and a skeleton guard force. Perfect timing, exactly what Darius had planned. Protect the Omegas, Sarah shouted, drawing the blade she now carried everywhere. Her 4 months of training snapped into focus. She moved like Kale had taught her, efficient, brutal, effective. The first mercenary who reached for her got her knife through his throat. The second took a kick to the knee that shattered bone. The third, Darius himself, crashed into her, sending them both sprawling. His hand locked around her wrist with crushing force. You're coming with me. This ends now. That touch, that assault on a bonded Luna triggered something primal. Silver fire didn't just flicker, it exploded. The blast threw Darius 30 feet backward. Sarah rose, and she wasn't just glowing anymore. She was burning with goddess power, silver flames wreathing her entire body like armor made of moonlight. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of the divine. You dare lay hands on me on a moon, blessed Luna, on the goddess's chosen. The remaining mercenaries fled. Smart. Darius tried to stand, his clothes scorched, his face blistered. Seraphina, please. Kneel, Sarah commanded, and her power drove him to his knees with force that cracked the stone beneath him. Kale and Thorn arrived minutes later with their warriors, only to find the battle already won. Their mate stood blazing with silver fire, Darius kneeling before her in forced submission, and every Ravenclaw wolf watching in awe. All the pack, Sarah said, her voice still echoing with power. All of them. They need to witness this. Within the hour, the great hall was packed. Sarah stood before the assembled pack still glowing faintly with Darius chained at her feet. Darius Blackthorn stands accused of attempted kidnapping of a bonded Luna assault with intent to harm and violation of territorial sovereignty, Sarah declared. How do you plead? Darius started. The evidence is clear. 30 witnesses, your mercenaries captured and confessing. The burns on your body from attacking me. Sarah's eyes blazed. You are found guilty. She raised her hands, silver fire dancing between her fingers. As moon-blessed Luna, I pass sentence, you are stripped of your alpha status. You are reduced to Omega rank. You are exiled permanently from all northern territories. Should you return, the sentence is death. You can't. Darius's protest died as silver fire engulfed him. The power didn't burn. It transformed. Every wolf in the hall watched in horrified fascination as Darius Blackthorn's alpha presence simply vanished. The dominance that had defined him for 30 years dissolved under moon-blessed fire, leaving him fundamentally changed at a soul-deep level. When the flames faded and Omega knelt where an alpha had been. You rejected me for being Omega, Sarah said softly, dangerously. Now you are what you despised. May you live long enough to understand exactly what you threw away. Darius was dragged from the hall, broken and sobbing. Sarah stood tall, blazing with power, and her pack howled their approval until the mountains echoed. That night in their private chambers, Sarah claimed her alphas with a ferocity that left all three breathless. She was dominant, powerful, celebrating victory on her own terms. Mine, she growled as she rode Thorn while Kale worshipped her with his mouth. My alphas, my pack, my power, everything I earned. Yours, they agreed, surrendering completely to their magnificent Luna. 8 months later, Seraphina Ashford Ravenclaw stood on the fortress balcony, one hand resting on her swollen belly, where twin heartbeats fluttered. The autumn sunset painted the Rockies in gold and crimson. Below her pack moved through evening routines, warriors training Omegas, laughing children playing. Peace, prosperity, everything she'd built from the ashes of rejection. They're active tonight, Kale said, coming up behind her. His hand joined hers on her belly, feeling their son's kick. Future alphas, Thorn added from her other side. Just like their fathers. Sarah smiled. Better than their fathers, because they'll be raised by a mother who knows her worth. The past 8 months had transformed Ravenclaw Pack into the most powerful in the Northern Territories. Sarah's Omega Combat program had spread to 6 neighboring packs. Her healing clinic served hundreds. The peace treaty she'd negotiated held strong. And her power fully manifested. She could heal mortal wounds now, could sense lies, could wield silver fire with precision that made even enemy alphas think twice about crossing Ravenclaw borders. What are you thinking? Thorn asked, his hand covering hers. That I was rejected, exiled, left to die in winter wilderness. And now I'm Luna of the strongest pack in the Rockies. Mated to twin Alpha Kings, carrying future leaders, living proof that the worst moments can lead to the greatest triumphs. She turned to face her mates, these alphas, who'd proven themselves worthy of standing beside a goddess-marked Omega. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me when no one else could, for waiting for my consent, for letting me be strong. Thank you, Kale countered, for choosing us, for trusting us, for being exactly who you are without apology. Forever, Shirai asked the same question she'd asked the night they'd first claimed her. Forever, both twins answered. The pack howled in the distance. The moon rose silver and full, and Seraphina Ashford Ravenclaw, once called Cursed, now known as the moon-blessed Luna, who transformed rejection into ultimate triumph, stood between her mates and felt complete. She placed both hands on her belly, speaking to the sons she'd soon bring into the world. Your mother was called cursed and became a queen. Remember that when the world tries to define you, you define yourself. The future stretched before her bright and boundless. Her pack, her power, her family, her legacy, everything she'd fought for, everything she'd earned, everything she deserved, and she'd done it all on her own terms. The cursed Omega who'd been thrown away had become the moon-blessed Luna, who ruled the Northern Rockies with silver fire and absolute authority. Darius Blackthorn lived alone in Eastern Territories, and Omega himself now haunted daily by the mate he'd rejected. But Seraphina Ashford Ravenclaw, she lived gloriously, powerfully, surrounded by love and respect, and the legacy she was building for generations to come. From rejection to redemption, from exile to empire, from curse to divine. That was her story, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here.